Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me on the podcast, one of your favorites, it's Kamran Bokhari, who is senior director of Eurasian Security and Prosperity at the New Lines Institute. We talk about the death of Ebrahim Raisi, talk a little bit about Iran, and explore some scenarios for Iran's future. Kamran, thank you so much for making time to do this on short notice. We recorded afternoon, Tuesday, May 21st. I'm not sure if this is coming out Wednesday or Thursday, but listeners, you will have a full week of content from us, so I hope you enjoy. You can email me at jacob@cognitive.investments if you want to talk at all about the podcast or anything we do at CI. Otherwise, take good care. Cheers and see you out there. Kamran, my friend, we got to stop meeting like this. It feels like we only catch up anytime something terrible is going on in the world. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good. Yeah, we need to meet other than geopolitically.
Yeah, that's for sure. I know you're living out in the country right now. I hope you at least take from this episode that you should not be taking any helicopters into the main office in Washington, D.C. I don't want to hear about you on any helicopters. I know you like the motorcycles.
No, I like my motorcycle, and I don't think at any point in my life that I will be, having a helicopter or taking a helicopter ride.
Well, good. That sounds good to me. Obviously, I wanted to chat with you. I mean, there's tons of stuff going on in the Middle East, the Muslim world in general, but Ebrahim Raisi is dead at the age of 63, and you were the first person I could think of to try and make sense of everything that's going on. And you've also we'll put a link to your report in the show notes. I mean, you published a really tremendous article. I mean, sort of your timing was impeccable. Post-Khamenei Iran, the future of evolutionary regime change, published just last month. And here we sort of are. Where do we start? Like, how important is Raisi's death? A lot of people out there are speculating that he was the next person in line for supreme leader. I have my doubts about that, but I'm curious. Do you think that we just lost the successor, or do you think this is just kind of like, he was a caretaker, but really all this stuff was continuing to go on behind the scenes?
So I'm with you. I don't buy that argument that he was a successor. He may have been in the running as one of several candidates, but given the way he became president, given the way that he doesn't, have scholarly credentials, he's not like there's no evidence that he ever finished his seminary studies. People can argue the same for the Khamenei, but Khamenei was still, had some religious credentials. He may not have been as high up as the founder of the regime, Khomeini himself, the leader of the revolution, but Raisi was, a much weaker player as far as, he's not a cleric. He's an ideologue who, became an operative in the regime in the early days and, worked his way up through the ranks. But he's spent his time as prosecutor in, various, nooks and crannies of the judiciary. He's most famous for, and I think he'll be remembered for that, is torturing people and executing people. Some estimates place that he may have ordered the executions or participated in the executions of at least 5,000 political opponents in the 80s. So that's the kind of figure he is, and so if in order for you to become president, the system had to engage in unprecedented levels of pre-electoral engineering. Then, and that's for the presidency. So it's hard to see you becoming, being the successor. So I think most people who believe that, kind of assume that because Khamenei himself was a two-time president before he became, or a two-term president before he became supreme leader. And the fact that, we're approaching the end of Khamenei's career, then, who else is there? And besides, there are no other clerics. The only other guy who's from the days of the revolution still around is Ayatollah Ahmad Jannati, who's believe it or not, 96. And he is the head of the infamous Guardian Council that basically, you know, to put it nicely, vets people for public office. To put it bluntly, disqualifies people they don't like. And which includes, you know, in recent days, some real regime stalwarts, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, Hassan Rouhani, two former presidents who were barred from, you know, participating in politics. Rouhani was barred from becoming member of the Assembly of Experts, which is the 88-member clerical body, nominally popularly elected. If you can get voter turnout, then you can claim that it is popularly elected. But nonetheless, its role is to elect the next supreme leader, in theory, hold him accountable, and in theory, even remove an undesirable supreme leader. None of that has happened. And even the election, you know, because Khamenei is just the second time that there's been a supreme leader. So when he goes, it's going to be a third time. So, you know, if you have Ahmad Jannati, who is 96, and he's also filling in the, you know, in the Assembly of Experts, as well as the Guardian Council, then, you know, who do you look for? And then you look around and you say, well, you know, who can we trust? Well, there's Raisi, and then you make him president. That doesn't repose a whole lot of confidence in his candidacy as supreme leader. Well, I mean, had he stayed alive, maybe he would have angled his way up. Nobody knows for sure. And, you know, people who think that, you know, either Khamenei's son or Raisi are like top candidates really don't understand that there are a lot of stakeholders in this decision. And as I argue in my report, it's not just the IRGC that will essentially, you know, determine the next supreme leader. It's also the regular armed forces. It's their moment to come out of the shadows as well. So it's very difficult to say who is going to become supreme leader. We may be surprised, and it may be somebody we've never heard of. And it's in the interest of the regime, if it's going to breathe new life into itself, or, you know, buy time before, you know, they really have to evolve and move into something different, that they find somebody who's not known for, you know, who is not hated. You know, all of these people are hated viscerally by the population. B is somebody who can deal with the challenges at home and make the pragmatic moves that are necessary to move forward if this regime is going to evolve and not just sort of wither away with time, which is what I try to argue in my report, is that this regime is going to be dominated by the military, and the next supreme leader is going to be a puppet in the hands of the officers. So I don't see, you know, I never saw Raisi as that, you know, in that league. But again, you know, now that he's dead, we will never know.
Yeah. We need to unpack everything that you just said, especially this idea that the next supreme leader will be constrained by the military, and that we're seeing the rise of really a military dictatorship displacing sort of clerical power. But the first thing before we get there, do you have any reason to suspect foul play in Raisi's death? I have not seen anything, but the timing is weird. The whole thing is a little bit weird. So do you have any reason to suspect foul play at all?
I mean, everything that we've seen suggests that this is a case of, you know, technical fault coupled with bad weather, and, you know, some bad decision making on the part of whoever was arranging this trip to, you know, ferry the president in a helicopter that's from the 1970s. Not that they have other choices. I mean, the sanctions have really prevented them from acquiring new equipment and even, you know, maintaining old ones. This isn't the first time an aircraft in Iran has gone down. This is, you know, pretty normal over the decades. And so, to me, it doesn't seem like there's any foul play. But if there is, I mean, it could be that and I don't have any evidence for this, that the internal jockeying for power ahead of the transition of the supreme leadership has reached a point where this guy was in the way of some factions, and they needed him out. But again, I'm just dabbling into sheer speculation here.
Yeah, I hear you. And this is going to be a very niche comparison, but I know that you will love it. You don't think there's any Garrick behind the scenes here pushing pins on the board, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, I love that analogy. Well, Raisi isn't, the head of the chairman of the Tal Shiar, and he's not, he's not the national security advisor to the pro-council of the Romulan Empire. And I doubt that there is someone like Garrick in the Iranian intelligence community. So I think that if this is a conspiracy, then it involves more than a Garrick. It involves, a clique, if you will, a faction. And then they have to be pretty hard-pressed to take such a drastic step. What was he doing that was just so costly for anyone to want to whack him like this? There are all sorts of conspiracy theories that, I'm sort of getting word of from inside that, there are those who are, trying to use this to seize power over the state and engage in even more bellicose and aggressive foreign policy moves. But once you sort of start to listen to those theories, they fall apart pretty quickly. There's so many holes in them. So I don't know. I mean, look, I never say never, but I really think that this is more incompetence than conspiracy. I, for one, if I had the job to make sure that the president safely returns from the border with Azerbaijan. By the way, for your listeners, I was in that area in April. I visited Azerbaijan, and our hosts at the Azerbaijan Diplomatic Academy flew us on a chartered plane from Baku to within 4 or 5 miles of the Iranian border on the other side. And then they took us on a road trip along the border with Armenia to show us the newly, territories that the Azerbaijanis reacquired in the 2020 NK war. So that area is pretty harsh. And if I had the responsibility, and then I would not want the president to be flying in such weather and in such visibility, conditions, and then knowing that we're not really up to speed. We're not firing on all thrusters when it comes to our aircraft. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that is more of an explanation than, somebody just offed him.
It is mind-boggling to me that you were on a charter plane to this part of the world a month ago, and the president of Iran is relegated to an old 1970s helicopter, which maybe tells you everything you need to know.
I was a guest of the Azerbaijanis. They have more money. Far more money.
I'm sure they do. It didn't used to be that way, though. I mean, one of my favorite charts to show is if you look at GDP in the Middle East and go back to the 1980s. I mean, that was the economic powerhouse of the region, and it's been supplanted by the Saudis and been supplanted by Turkey. It's actually gone in opposite directions because of the sanctions and everything else. But yeah, it's very stark. Well, then, sort of, let's take a step back then. So I take your point, no conspiracy theories, or at least there's not reason to think that anything's going on there. What happens next? Does this change Iran's posture in the region? Do you think that some of this infighting needs to come out? Do you think it's just as simple as, mean, I said this myself actually a couple of days ago on my own podcast, that I feel like I've been hearing about the demise of Khamenei since I started my career. So who knows? He might live another 15 years. We could still be talking about this in 2035 for all I know.
It's always possible, but let's take the Saudi monarchs as a point of comparison. So King Abdullah was an anomaly. He lived till he was 90. But really, in the last years of his life, he wasn't as, coherent or there, if you will. And so if that's sort of like the high point, and the Saudis have a lot more resources than the Iranians when it comes to medical care, quality of life, and so on and so forth. They have access to the best medical facilities. The Iranians are relegated. I mean, this man, the last time he left the country when he was president, and he made some official trips somewhere. He hasn't left the country in 35 years. So it's hard to see him, at the age of 95, still being supreme leader. So we can never say when somebody's going to die, even if their health is failing. But, when you're 85 and people around you have to plan for the future, you have to plan for the future. If you are Khamenei and this is your baby, Iran, the Islamic Republic, he has built the Islamic Republic in a way that even the founder of the Republic did not get to do. So he wants to see it, be there and thrive well beyond his lifespan. So you are preparing, and that the situation is very, very bad. You have pushed on the foreign policy front aggressively at the expense of domestic political economic stability. You have a population that is angry and increasingly angry. We've not, the most intense protests were in 2022 after the killing of Mahsa Amini, the poor Kurdish girl who was killed in the custody of morality police for allegedly being, not dressed properly. And so, all of that. That this cannot continue. That your attempts to extract sanctions relief from the United States fell on its face when former President Trump nixed the nuclear deal. If nothing else motivates you, if you don't really care about domestic political economy and you're so ideological that you believe and actually drink your old Kool-Aid, which I don't think Khamenei does. It's something to serve to others, not to drink yourself. But let's say you are ideological and it's blinded you. At the very least, you want to look at your strategic situation in the Middle East, and you want to say, Turkey is completely checkmated. The Arab world is in disarray increasingly. Israel is facing some unprecedented public backlash from across the world. The United States is on the defensive. You are the driver of geopolitical events in the region, and everybody else is reacting to your moves. You want to be able to keep that going. You want to be able to consolidate it. You don't want to go so aggressively that you fall on your face. And so you need to be able to step back and sort of say, okay, you know what? We're in a pretty comfortable situation. We don't need to continue to grow and spend money. Well, let's focus on the home front. Let's this is a new generation. Most Iranians weren't even born when the revolution took place, and most Iranians were born well after the revolution. All they remember is an oppressive regime. And you want to be able to deal with that. You want to address that in some shape or form. You may not have the solutions, but those are things that you want to do, and you're dying, which means that you can do little. And not to mention that the institutions and the power centers that you've spawned, particularly the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which is internally fragmented as well, is a power center now. So you don't call all the shots. I mean, one of the things about the regime in Iran is there is no one person calling the shots. So yes, Khamenei is like, the guy who sort of signs off in the end, but it's not like he says and everybody obeys. He's got to factor in a lot of what his, allies and partners also want to say. I mean, the fact that not just Ahmadinejad and Rouhani were disqualified, Ali Larijani was disqualified from running for the presidency when Raisi became president. When you're having a situation where you're having to cull your own people and rely on a very small coterie, an increasingly small coterie of really ideological youngsters, or those who, like Raisi, were not young, but still are not very competent, but loyal and, properly ideologically conditioned. And so then you're in trouble. So I think that these are the things on the minds of not just Khamenei, but those who are going to be here in Iran long after Khamenei has, met his creator.
Yeah. I want to talk about that. But before we leave this subject, what do you think, if Khomeini was alive today, what do you think he would think of the revolution and how it's gone?
That's probably the most difficult question you've ever asked me on this topic. In some sense, he would be disappointed. He would, obviously, I mean, not to say that Khamenei is happy. He's also disappointed, struggling, trying to keep a brave face and whatnot. But as far as Khomeini is concerned, look, he died in 1989. His last probably major decisions were signing the peace treaty with Iraq after a disastrous 8-year war. He himself said, described it as drinking from the poison chalice. That statement of his is very famous. So that was one. So he wasn't really happy towards the end of his life about that. The second thing is that he saw during his time as supreme leader that his own president, the current supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, was fighting with his prime minister, Mir Hussein Mousavi, who tried to run for president against Ahmadinejad and, claimed foul play in the elections of 2009, which triggered the Green Uprising, the Green Movement. So he saw, a lot of trouble in his time. But I think that he would be disappointed that, this revolution didn't turn out didn't produce a republic, that was stable. It required more stability. At least every founder wants their project to be stable and thriving and whatnot. But I would say that on the foreign policy front, he probably would have been pleased that, the regime that he brought to power, from his point of view, the Islamic revolution that he led has been exported, if you will, at least from his point of view. So that may, give him something to be happy about. But he was also a realist. You have to be, if you're people like that have to be realists while they're ideologues. So it's a mixed bag. I think that on one hand he would be happy about Iran's influence in the region, but I think that the situation at home, especially with the young people, and I think I mentioned this in my report as well, that religiosity is declining in the country, And there are clerics who are not sort of like in the political halls of power, but are in sort of the seminaries in Qom and Mashhad and other places like Shiraz and Isfahan, who are looking at this and saying, maybe Sistani was right all along. Maybe Khomeini was, his whole idea of vilayat faqih and the clerics having direct control over state and politics and governance is a bad idea, because not only are we losing political power, but we're also losing religious authority if people don't, are unhappy with just the restrictions that come through this regime. So in other words, the Islamism of this regime has damaged the sort of the core religious position of the Shiite theocracy or Shiite clergy in Iran. So they're, as you know, that in Shia Islam, the clergy are very powerful because the people are obligated, the laity is obligated to follow one cleric, and that gives them a tremendous amount of influence over society, not to mention financial power as well through the the alms and the charities that they run, and people donate to it. So that whole edifice, the religious, political, economic edifice, is under threat. So I think that that's something that if Khomeini was looking at that and saying, oh my God, what have I done? But I'm being optimistic here. Reading into the minds of people like Khomeini is extremely difficult.
Yeah. It's very, very hard to compare Iran to anything else. I mean, there's a lot of reasons it's hard to get information about Iran and think about Iran, but I really can't think of an analogous regime in the world, certainly not in the modern era. Maybe you can, in the recesses of your mind, bring up a 12th century something that I haven't thought about at all. It seems to me that the closest analog to what you're talking about is maybe Egypt, but Egypt doesn't really map on because there wasn't a religious element that took over the state and then the military co-opted from them. It was the military the whole time. So there's not really an example of a clerical state that has an army, but also a paramilitary group. And the paramilitary group is supposed to be the protector of the revolution. And you fast forward and they're still around, 40 years later. And now the paramilitary group is not defending the revolution. They're conquering the state itself, and they're battling with the Iranian military for this. And there's all these interfactions. So the question in there is, I know that we can't compare it to any other state, but like, what is your closest analog? Do you think that the future looks something like the military's takeover of the Egyptian economy and state? Is that not helpful? Is it something more like Turkey and the AKP? I mean, like, help me think, is there any analog, or do we really just need to think of this is a whole new beast? And the thing that we're really pointing out here is that we're in uncharted territory. And we've never had a paramilitary group and an army squaring off against a clerical class. And we can say that, maybe the army's going to take over, but we're in uncharted waters.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the simple answer is no, I can't think of an analog. I don't think that we can compare the Islamic Republic of Iran to anything that, any other type of state in the modern era. Perhaps the Taliban are following the footsteps of the Islamic Republic, but that would be comparing the emirate with the Islamic Republic, not the other way around. They are where the Islamic Republic was in the early 80s. So their journey has just begun, and if they are realists, then they would want to avoid the mistakes that Iran made, knowing that they do not have the same amount of resources that Iran enjoyed through oil exports and being a much bigger economy than Afghanistan can ever be. But no, I think that this is a unique polity. It's a hybrid between a very particularistic, very peculiar, very, if you will, peripheral understanding of Shiite Islam and Shiite Islamism. So the doctrine of wilayat faqih, which is a state must be ruled by a jurist, and the most senior jurist, is something that's not very popular in Shia Islam either. I mean, if you look, mainstream Shia Islam in the contemporary age revolves around the personality of Ayatollah Ali Sistani, who is probably the most popular Shia cleric on the face of the planet right now. And he hails from what is called the quietist school of Shia Islam, which is that clergy should influence indirectly the political class, but should not get involved directly into politics, and religion should be preserved. The religion is sacred, and politics is where compromises and all sorts of other wheeling and dealing take place. So you want to keep those two realms separate. So in this, the Iranian regime is a very, very, it's a minority view, and it's a highly peripheral view, even within. It's not the dominant school of thought. Far from it. It's kind of like the minority school of thought. So you start with that, and then you say, okay, how do I graft a modern state based on this idea that the most senior jurist, cleric, theologian must rule, the government or run the government? So then you borrow from Western parliamentary democracy. So you have parliament, you have a presidency, you have a judiciary, and the modern trappings of any modern Western style regime. So this is a hybrid between the two, and so and because of this, the regime from the get-go was hardwired with problems. And you if you look at the history, which I've tried to do in my report, as to why this regime ended up the way it has, you can see a direct line from the decision to build a regime like this. And it would be fair to say that Khamenei is someone who has been trying to constantly, solve problems, and in the process create new ones. So you started out with the Guardian Council and Parliament fighting each other. Parliament, by law, by the Constitution, Parliament makes laws. But that's not the end of it. The Guardian Council has to make sure that they're Sharia compliant, and so you can make laws, but if we don't sign off on it, we the 12-member body called the Guardian Council, composed of 6 theologians and 6 jurists, if we don't sign off on it, it's not law. So then what you have a 250 plus parliament, I think it's 290 MPs, and then 12-member clergy, at loggerheads over what needs to be the law of the land. In order to solve that, you create something called the Expediency Council, and you bring in Rafsanjani to play referee. And then you build 2 different militaries. One is there for, you need a conventional military. Every country does. You don't fully trust it because it was built by the Shah. You purge it of people, and you hope that the people who are still there from the old days, mixed in with new people, are going to be loyal to you, but you're not really sure. So you build the IRGC, which on one hand, you say military should not be involved in politics. You make it the law of the land. But then you make an exception for the IRGC, and it's a vague exception to begin with, open to all forms of interpretations. And over time, that interpretation allows the IRGC not to just be involved politically, but also have a hand in the national cookie jar, and essentially run everything from industry to, the energy sector, to the weapons industry, to construction, to telecommunications, and you name it. And so this it's almost like patchwork, that we have this problem, let me build another institution here, and that will solve the problem. So I'm not sure if you got a chance to see that graphic that was included in my report. And you probably saw an earlier version of that during our days at Stratfor, maybe GPF. But it gives you a sense of just how Byzantine and how complicated this maze of institutions and who has what power and what not. And then not only do you keep balancing factions that you've created, your job as supreme leader is to stay on top of it, so that while these people fight and you mediate, they all keep deferring to you. And that's hard over time. And that's what's happened. So now what we have is, even though Khamenei is still around, he's not as powerful as he used to. There's a lot of agency and authority with the military. And then when the IRGC became too powerful, you started to enable the regular armed forces as a counterweight. So now you created a competition there. So ultimately, this is going to be less of a theocracy, more of a military-dominated state. But it's not that simple. You mentioned Egypt and you mentioned Turkey, and I'll bring in Pakistan and Burma, Myanmar, Nigeria, Algeria, and Thailand. These are, prominent military-dominated regimes. Iran is still very different from them, because at least that there's one military. Here you have two militaries. How will they, share power in this post-Khamenei era? And so, they have to agree on a puppet who's going to be the new supreme leader. So if the military is going to dominate, it's only reasonable to assume that the next supreme leader is going to be a puppet of sorts in the hands of the military. So, can they arrive at a compromise puppet? So these are things that have to be worked out. And I'm sure these are things that are subject of debate and jockeying and back and forth and negotiation and any efforts at compromise as we speak, because these are things that cannot be decided. I mean, the IRGC, as I said, is full of, all sorts of pragmatists and all sorts of ideologues ranging from moderate to hardline. And, on the pragmatic side, you have Islamist pragmatics to secular pragmatists. And so this is a complicated edifice. And that's why I think to answer your question, no, I've not seen a regime like this. This is very different. We always sort of say, hey, there are similarities between Russia, China, maybe North Korea and Iran, and we put them in one bucket. The Islamic Republic is very, very different. It's a beast unto itself. I don't think I've seen anything like it at all.
Kamran, it sounds to me like you're describing the setup for an Iranian civil war. Is that the wrong conclusion to make?
Well, some people would say that is not the wrong conclusion, because ultimately they don't have faith in this all working out. And some of them wish that it doesn't work out. Depends on who you're talking. It doesn't work out, and there is a civil war. But yes, I mean, if we do not see Iran safely get to the other side, whatever that other side looks like, after, Khamenei is no more, there's a new supreme leader. Right now, there are two broad camps, and probably camp is the most accurate way to describe it, because a camp is different from a faction. Even within a faction, there are sub-factions, but a camp consists of a broad tent. So there is the ideological camp, and then there is, and I don't mean to turn this into a binary, but if we had to make use of binary constructions, I'd say there's the ideological camp, and then there is the pragmatic camp. And they're internally very divided, but broadly there are some common denominators. For the pragmatists, they see this transition as, hey, this is the opportunity to solve a lot of problems. We need a supreme leader who will go easy on, the public at home, lift some of the restrictions. We're not going to go ahead and do what MBS did in Saudi Arabia and put the clergy in lock and key, because he could do it. They can't. But we need to ease up. We can't force these social and religious restrictions and shove them down people's throats, or we're just basically stoking a fire that'll burn us. And then we need to somehow get out of sanctions. There are people amongst the guards, the IRGC elite, that say, look what we've accomplished while being under sanctions. Imagine if we had less sanctions on us. Not saying totally gone, but if we had, let's say, a quarter of them, we had 75% of what we have right now, where would we be? And then, the view, this is not just a view within the guards, but across the Iranian political establishment, is that, they're not unhappy. They're not happy with the situation where their adversaries across the Persian Gulf, the Qatars of this world, the UAE and the Saudis, are exporting oil and gas like there's no tomorrow, while these guys can't. So they're licking their wounds. And they're saying, now's the time to do what China did when they reached an understanding with the United States. Doesn't mean we give up our national interest, doesn't mean we become pro-Western or friendly to the United States or even normalized with the United States. It's just that we reach an understanding, and we need to be able to, if we're going to manage this vast influence that we've acquired in the Middle East and not squander it, then we need to have some sort of an understanding with the powers that be. The United States, we need to have some form of indirect understanding with Israel. Hezbollah has it, so why can't we? And so we need to manage this adversarial relationship. We're in the same region. So we need a supreme leader who will allow for all of this. Now, those are then sort of, pushed back by those who say, oh, this is just a recipe for disaster. This is a downward spiral that, that can spin out of control very easily. If you compromise on one thing and then there's another compromise, and ultimately the revolution is gone, then ultimately there's no difference between us. We moderate to the point where we've diluted the ideals of the revolution. And this is something that, this camp says that, all you guys, and this was something that was a charge against Rouhani when he was negotiating the nuclear deal with the United States, is that your behavior is allowing for U.S. and Western infiltration of our political system. We cannot normalize. All we need to do is have a negotiated settlement, and that's all. That's where we draw the line. This should not lead to a more understanding with the United States and then people-to-people contact, and then lo and behold, we have some form of, relationship, even if it's not diplomatic, and that's bad news. And so you have that pushback, and those people know that they will be out of business. That camp knows they have no political future. They have a lot to lose if a supreme leader like that emerges. So they want a supreme leader who will sort of say, we're going to stay the course, we're going to hold the line, and, we're going to get to the other side. And they have a lot to, they have their arguments that, look how far we've come, why are we giving up now? And we've weathered the Masa Amini uprising. We look where we are in the region. We have the United States on the defensive. So what's wrong with these policies? So this is a debate that is taking place amongst the elite within the regime, particularly within the armed forces. We have to see, what becomes of this, who comes out on top. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that either way, Iran has to achieve nuclear weapons before it can do anything in both camps. Because I mean, the problem with the China metaphor is that China already has nukes at that point. It's not feeling threatened existentially by anyone, and it can afford to. Well, I guess it's being threatened by Russia, but like nukes weren't on the table. It wasn't like get rid of your nuclear weapons was Nixon's price for the shift, right? Whereas it feels difficult to imagine that anyone in the West is going to relax sanctions on Iran as long as either the nukes haven't been developed yet and they're trying to arrest development of the nuclear weapons, or they have to, declare that they have the nuclear weapons and the West just has to say, okay, like Iran will be like Israel, or it'll be like Pakistan. Like, okay, this is a country that has nuclear weapons. We're not going to, it's a fate. It's already done. Like, let's try and reach a modus vivendi now that means that they don't use the nuclear weapons rather than stopping development. Is that the right way to think about it?
Oh yeah, that's a great argument that you've made, and I would say that in response, let's just say that if in 6 months to a year, a lot of strange things have been happening, and we never thought the Houthis would do anything other than lob missiles and drones at Saudi and UAE.
Yeah.
They disrupted commercial shipping, encouraged by their patrons in Tehran.
Still disrupting,
and still disrupting, and this capability is going to grow. We never thought that Iran would directly engage Israel. It will always operate via proxy. Strange things are happening. Khamenei is about to pass the baton. Not to say, not to relitigate the foul play argument, but the president of Iran dies suddenly. So there are a lot of strange things that are happening. So let's just put it this way. I would not be surprised that if in 6 months to a year, the Iranians conducted a crude nuclear test. That doesn't mean they have a bomb. That just means that they have crossed the threshold. They have enriched uranium to achieve fissile material needed for a bomb. Then you have to put it in a metal box or a sphere to call it a bomb. And I'm not a nuclear engineer, far from it. I know nothing about it, but common sense tells me that there is an engineering process from just having highly enriched fissile material, weapons grade, and getting to an actual weapon. And then the delivery system. So they may not have a nuke, but they may basically say, look, we've done it, so let's talk on different terms. So there, yes, you're right, that could happen. And on this, I don't think any faction is going to compromise. You can be as pragmatic as you want. And in my report, I say that just like China did not become friends with the United States and continued to pursue its own national interest to the point where it's now the largest adversary, of the United States, Iran too will become less theocratic. Maybe the ideology over time will, not be as hawkish, but they will always be Iranian nationalists. There will always be the Islamic identity that they will appeal to, that will shape their thinking. And Iran, for the long haul, no matter, doesn't matter if you have a pragmatic supreme leader, it will be a problem for the United States. It will be a challenge in the region, and partly because there are no countervailing forces. Turkey is not in a position to challenge Iran, which is, the historical competitor and the potential counterweight. And the Arab world is in a mess. And there's only so much the U.S. can do. The situation for Israel is, they have other problems to deal with that have to do with national survival. So if they need, their view, the Israeli imperative is to defend itself against Iranian moves in the region.
That's the Netanyahu imperative. I would argue just the cold geopolitical imperative should be you need Iran as a counterweight against Turkey. Like if we were, getting rid of all the politics and everything else that is piled on top of it, like to me, a clear-headed Israeli strategist should be able to see that. But I mean, things there are not good, as you know.
No, I agree with you. I'm just saying that if you're Israel, you don't want either side to be too powerful. You want to balance. The Arab states depend on you for their well-being. Hence the Abraham Accords, and hence this, this futuristic potential, normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. But at the end of the day, Iran, enjoys a large amount of disproportionate amount of influence in the Arab world. So there aren't any other players. And the planet has become too complicated for the United States to pay so much attention to the Middle East. There's, only so many resources that the United States wants to deploy. Contrast, I know the circumstances are not the same, but contrast at a very, very high level from a 30,000-foot view, the U.S. responds to the invasion of Kuwait and what the U.S. was able to do at the time versus not having a solution to the Houthi problem. I mean, in my opinion, the Houthis are far more of a problem than even Hezbollah. Because Hezbollah we know what it is, but the Houthis are just getting started, and they sit on a piece of geopolitical real estate that, has far bigger implications than what Hezbollah can do. Hezbollah can wage a war against Israel, and there could be a war that could go on for a month or more, but that's it. But the Houthis, they're disrupting commercial shipping. I mean, it's a challenge to U.S. naval presence. It adds strain on U.S. resources to be able to keep an eye on what they're doing and continue to degrade their capabilities. And then what do you say? I mean, are we now mowing the Yemeni lawn for the long haul? Is that our job now?
I've been saying, I mean, there's a U.S. election later this year that's going to be a big deal, and there's elections in India and Mexico and all these other things. But I've said a couple times, I think when historians look back at the year 2024, I think there will be a big section in the history book that says, and this was the year that a ragtag group of Yemeni militants were able to challenge the dominance of U.S. naval supremacy in a key choke point, and led to the emergence of this multipolar world that we're seeing all around us. Kamran, any parting thoughts before we say goodbye? I think you've covered most of it, but anything else you want the listeners to know about Iran or anything else happening in the region before we part?
No, I would just I just want to add that it's even we'll be able to reach a ceasefire at some point in Gaza, because all wars do come to an end. The question is when and what are the terms.
There might not be anything left of Gaza by the end of it, but yes, there will be.
I mean, most of it is devastated anyway. It's already gone. It's a pretty bad situation from a humanitarian point of view, but that doesn't mean that the problems that Iran exploits are going to somehow be reduced. So Hamas not being in power in Gaza may reduce Iranian capability to create problems, but they're already eyeing Jordan and by extension the West Bank. And even if there's a ceasefire today, and the Israelis withdraw back to the Sharon lines, will there be a Palestinian administration that can be effective?
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny you say that. I mean, I sent out a note to our clients just last week that said, Jordan has never made any sense on paper as a country. Churchill famously helped draw the borders drunkenly, but even less so now. And I'm sure you're alluding to that conspiracy that the Jordanians said they foiled of Iran trying to get weapons into the kingdom. So I take your point. I mean, Jordan, it's been a pressure point for so long. maybe it'll stay indefinitely. They've sort of gone against the odds as far as I can tell, but that seems like a real weak point and a real place for Iran to exploit. I agree 100%.
So I think we need to watch Iran for the long haul, irrespective of who becomes supreme leader, irrespective of what happens in Gaza. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that the world will give us other strange things to talk about, Kamran. And we'll have you back on for an episode where there isn't some burning crisis in the news, so we can take a step back. But I appreciate you making time to talk about Raisi's death. Take care, okay?
All righty. Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.